Yeah, we're getting it ready now.
Okay, there we go. Fantastic. So that'll be right afterwards as we look forward to this next session. And just a little background, because I think we're just about ready to...
You do background from your chair, Greg?
Yep, okay. I think just when you thought I had control of this, didn't you? There we go. Testing, testing. All set? Thank you for your patience, by the way, with the appellate division. Obviously, it goes till it ends. They don't have a clock, and we weren't going to impose one, and they worked it in nicely, and so thank you for your patience. And especially Mark convey that they were just so terrific to work with us. We are thrilled to have Judge Martoche here. It's called A Conversation with the Honorable Salvatore R. Martoche, the opioid crisis. It's personal. And let me just, right up front, this is not an easy subject. It's not an easy subject generally, and certainly not an easy subject personally. And you must applaud Judge Martoche for stepping forward and making time today to talk about something which is real, it's personal, and I trust will be instructive. And on behalf of the Bar Association, we thank you for making available a very tough topic, and I'm delighted to do that. But on a brighter note, you just heard Presiding Judge Whalen call you out about your ability to pick out fine dining.
You got to look long and hard in Chautauqua County, folks.
So you just on the side, just before we get going here, Judge, you were on the bench. You've been on the bar, the bench. You've been at Chautauqua County. You've listened to many of these folks you've had before you. You were on the appellate division. Today was it was the first time ever we've had a chance, we as members of the bar, to see the appellate division here at the Jackson Center. What's your kind of reaction of the morning's activities, and is there a walk-away, a lesson from that?
Well, you know, the appellate division started doing these tours in various stages, particularly with Justice Piggott when he was the presiding judge. And you may recall he was over at the Chautauqua Institution. It is a great opportunity for the public and for lawyers who don't practice in appellate courts to get to see the difference. And then when you hear a discussion that follows it, like the one you heard today, where Justice Perodato in particular really took you behind the closed doors of a process that's not as easily understood and as easily observed as the one in the trial courts. It's sort of secretive and sort of mysterious, and I think that it's intimidating, the very fact that there is this sort of wall between it, which they must have. I sat on the appellate division for a long time, and I can tell you the work is harder. The collegiality that they discussed is really necessary, because if you're not collegial and if you don't have a great understanding of needing to, as much as possible, come to a consensus, if you don't realize that you can argue and disagree without being disagreeable or lack civility, if you don't understand that, the process becomes impossible. So I think this was very instructive. I think that this was historic, as you point out. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Greg has managed to turn this center, the Jackson Center, into much more than a memorial for Justice Jackson. It's a living, breathing entity, which I remember coming in this very room when Judge Gerasi was here with, and discussing the late Mr. Capra, is it, who was, and talking about him and the plans, and the thoughts and the dreams that went into this place, and to see what's happening here, and to follow its progress. It's an enormous benefit. I think it may be rightfully considered the beginning of the rebirth that you're seeing here in Jamestown now. You now have that comedy center. You have that new hotel in Celeron, which is going to be tremendous. I still think they need a little work in their kitchen, but other than that...
Back to the culinary stuff, yeah.
But let me just say from the get-go here, this is a difficult topic for me to talk about. Greg asked me to do this, something like this a year ago, I think, and I couldn't do it. I've got a little bone to pick with him. I sent him a draft and I changed the title a little bit. And when I got the draft back 3 days ago, it had changed it back. I intended to make this presentation one that I could give lawyers some hints and some direction on what they should be doing, what their obligations and all of this is with clients, with colleagues, and with themselves. I know the tremendous pressures of practicing law and making other people's burdens your own. So I tried to change that. And Gregory, or one of his many minions, changed it back. And I didn't know whether I was angry or upset for a moment with him or with what I knew it would do to me. If I leave you with anything today, I want to leave you with the recognition that substance use disorder, SUD, is a defined illness. It's a disease. It's not a weakness or a moral failing. It is a disease. And if you take it as a disease, then I think it changes how you look at it. Part of the solution, that's what I want you to be. Because you're either part of the solution or you're a continuing part of the problem. It's so easy to listen to somebody like me for a few minutes and to leave the room and go back to saying, yeah, it's a terrible thing. But believe me, if it hasn't hit you, I'd be surprised if it hadn't hit some of you, most of you, one way or another, with a friend, a family member, a client. And it is, to me, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest danger, potential danger to this country, much bigger than terrorism. We're worried about terrorism. We're spending a ton of money, and rightfully so. And we're making our country as safe as we can make it. But I'm telling you, this thing, this killer, is from within. And unlike cancer or heart disease, which are bad, certainly, it has not had the attention, A, because there's a stigma attached to it, and B, because you can't see it. It's hard to quantify it. These weak-willed kids, they go ahead and they're thrill-seeking all the time. Well, I'm not saying that's not part of this. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying this thing has now reached the epidemic proportions where it attacks the very fiber of our country, of our society. The cost, if you add it all up, the social cost of incarcerating people or medically treating them, of dealing with the family problems of children, spouses, family members who don't have a support system, economic or otherwise, with which to deal. It's just enormous. So it sort of reminds me of the old Fram oil commercial. You pay now or you pay later. And if you pay later, you pay bigger. So I think the lawyers in this room have an opportunity that sometimes others don't have. They should and they can, but they don't. You know legislators, you know executives, you know police and law enforcement people, you know. I think you have an obligation to your families, to your community, not to waste that opportunity to be a voice for change, for recognizing that this is something that is filling our jails with people who would be much better served in a different setting. This Sullivan's article that I pointed out shows the total coverage, geographically speaking, of this problem, Greg. It's no more safe havens. When I started out, I'll just tell you a little bit about my background for those of you who don't know, because I thought that I knew more about this than I did. I thought that through the years I was a person who really knew this stuff. I was a public defender early in my career. I represented people from the inner city mostly African Americans, and they had this terrible problem with drugs. And then I said to myself, my God, we've got to stop this. And how are we going to do it? Because I saw then the wreckage, the family wreckage, the wreckage of young lives over and over again. So from my days in a public defender, I ran a bail program, pretrial services agency in Erie County when I was younger. And again, I saw the reaction, and I saw something else. I saw something very amazing. I saw people who couldn't make any bail at all. They could not make bail. So they were incarcerated before the fact. And it wasn't because they were a flight risk. It wasn't because their crime was so substantial. It was because they had nothing, because they had no wherewithal with which to provide something to help them get out. And I learned this. I learned that you cannot help in your own defense if you are incarcerated nearly as well as you can if you're out. So you're behind the eight ball before you start. So now my career goes on a little bit, and I go into private practice, and I'm still representing a lot of people. And as I said, a lot of African Americans, a lot of people in the music and entertainment world would get, it seemed to me, from my personal vantage point, involved with drug abuse, creative people. And then I noticed a lot of people who were nervous, who had maybe some mental illness, and I started to piece it together, and I went back, and I learned that, first of all, I've learned now that each and every one of us has mental health issues. It's only a question of how much, how far, and we all have them. I also know that the overwhelming majority of people who are convicted of drug abuse or have been drug users, the overwhelming majority of them have serious mental health issues. Now, you add this up, and there was I don't know if any of you remember Judge Matina, Judge Joseph Matina. But before he was a surrogate, even going back to the days before he was a Supreme Court judge, he was a city court judge on a mission, and he saw the problems that were being generated and was trying to get the communities activated in a way to deal with this problem before it became quite as large as it is today. And he enlisted me in that effort. Make a long story short, people didn't want to listen. If they had, we wouldn't be nearly in the shape we are as a country dealing with this problem as we are today. I've been in private practice with small firms and large firms throughout my life. I was counsel to the majority leader in the New York State Senate. I was there at the inception of the Rockefeller drug laws. And I said, these things are going to be too tough. They're going to treat this problem in a way which says there's not discernment between the user, who's also a pusher to support a habit, and the pusher, the real bad guys who are supplying this and making a fortune on it. And I learned through the years that people will put a great distance between themselves and this product that they're selling, this illicit product, but they very seldom put very much distance between themselves and the money. So I learned that you should follow the money trail. And when I became the United States Attorney for the Western District here for 4.5 years, I tried to use that philosophy. I saw that it was important that we hammer away at the supplies and the way they were entering this country. Never dawned on me that we should close the borders. Really seemed to me that we need to develop techniques to deal with the crisis. But anyway, so after that stint, I went to Washington. I was at the Department of Labor as an assistant secretary, and I saw the workplace problems of the use of drugs, the lack of productivity that was being engendered because of sick time and because people simply didn't have the wherewithal as individuals to do their jobs. They were nodding off. They had all kinds of things happening to them. So I go to the Department of the Treasury, and I become the Assistant Secretary of Enforcement over there. And I have the Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Customs Service, as well as the Criminal Division of the IRS, all reporting to me, all the enforcement agencies. And again, I stood up and said, we have to follow the money trail. We have to, examine what we're doing on the border that's allowing this stuff to come in. Tunnels. Sometimes people think it's a joke. Do you know how much it costs to drill a tunnel from Mexico to the United States? Even a few miles. El Chapo did it again recently when he was escaping. If there's enough money in it, the problems are manageable for a whole group of people. You have Arthur Bailey here today, who, by the way, that's his generous contribution behind us. I don't know how Gregory does it, but he manages to enlist more and more people. Arthur is the lead counsel, one of the lead counsels, I should say, on a lawsuit that is being brought by a certain group of hospitals against big pharma. And the idea is to hold them accountable for the misinformation that they provided, which is responsible for a lot of the drug problems that exist in our country today. I don't want to hold the hospitals or the doctors harmless. Don't want to do that. Arthur may disagree with me on that, but I will say this. It starts with big pharma. You know, we have developed a society here that says, if you sell my pills, I'll give you some bonuses. I'll give you some trips. Just use them. Oh, they're good pills. People won't be in any kind of pain when you give them these pills. They won't be reporting you. And by the way, the hospitals don't want to hear that their doctors are not keeping you comfortable. The doctor doesn't want to hear it because his staff, they don't know how to deal with troublemakers as they look at them in the waiting rooms or phone calls. They don't want to deal with the kinds of things that people do when they're desperate with pain. So when somebody tells you, as Arthur's lawsuit will indicate, that this pill is safe, you don't mind using it. But you use it a little too much. And then a little too much becomes a little too more too much. And the individuals who are using these pills may or may not, they're more likely today to know about some of the consequences than they were years ago. My daughter, Claire, she was so smart. She was an athlete. She was a beautiful girl. We took her home at 3 days old. She was adopted. And I remember I was at a conference out of the state, and my wife picked her up. I didn't see her till she was 4 days old. She just always a sort of a independent kid. Always had, she marched to a slightly different tune. She was sort of a hippie. People must have thought we were the craziest parents. She would pick out her own outfits to wear to school, and they were outrageous. I'm not a big fashion guy, but, colors that are supposed to match, or something about stripes and checkers and things like that. She would get insistent that this is the way she wanted to be. Well, we considered a lot of her rebellion early on as, the usual kinds of things that some people get into, because everybody is different. And that's the lesson we have to remember with drugs. You say to yourself, why is it that John, who took drugs, could stop taking them? And why can't Mary stop taking them? Because John and Mary's chemistry are different. Because the limbic system and the cortex of the brain are affected differently by them. But they are affected. This monster, this opioid crisis, destroys the systems that protect us in our brains. Destroys them. Sometimes, if you get there early enough, you can reverse it. Sometimes you can't. So don't think it's like a weakness that Mary didn't get better and John did. Mary just was lucky. She was born with different genes. And, you know, there's a lot of ways of looking at whether or not, Greg, whether or not marijuana is a gateway drug. That's the big talk now. Ladies and gentlemen, marijuana is going to be legalized, in my estimation, in the state of New York very shortly for one very simple reason. Revenue. Revenue. Money. Because the state of New York, like every other entity, has tremendous pressure to provide more and more entitlements and less opportunity to get those things. So they say this is the lesser of two evils. I don't know. Maybe it is. There are those who have argued that marijuana, if you use marijuana, maybe you won't use opioids. I think it's BS, but all I'm saying today, ladies and gentlemen, is if you have any influence with anybody who, or if you have the strength and the wherewithal and the discipline to write a letter, we should have learned from our past experiences. Let's start with prohibition. Once you legalize something, there's no turning back. We tried that. It failed. I've also come to believe that threshold drugs don't mean that necessarily you are so hooked on marijuana, let's say, that now you have to go up and start using cocaine or pills or anything else, and then ultimately heroin and fentanyl. No, not in that sense, but there's a lifestyle and an adventure that people who are not analyzing this all too carefully, and children, young people particularly, are susceptible to not doing that kind of analysis. Oh man, take these mushrooms. You know, these are terrific. You're gonna feel great. Take this psychedelic drug, whatever it is. You're more likely to do that, and you're more likely to do that if you are somebody who is disenfranchised, if you are somebody who has no hope, if you are somebody who has no opportunities, if you are somebody who has no guidance. So, as I look at it, it is a gateway. It's a gateway to a lifestyle. It's a gateway to adventurous opportunities that are dangerous. People want to go swimming in waters where there are sharks. Okay, but I think you're crazy. I'm going through all of this because I think it's important that you realize that it's not something that is somebody else's problem. Because if we all take that, you know, that's like, I think it was Martin Buber, there was a great philosopher who was talking about Hitler in Germany, and he said, he used the analysis where somebody came for this group, I'll say the Jews, and he said, I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't help them. And somebody came for that group, and I wasn't part of that group, and so I didn't help them. And somebody came for another group and another group. Finally, they came for me, and there was nobody left to help me. My daughter had the best education. She was in Montessori school. She went to the best schools in Buffalo. She was a university graduate. She was a tremendous whiz with math. She had mental health problems that we didn't see. She had anxieties that we didn't recognize. But we tried our best. And like any parent who goes through something traumatic like this, you know, we have sort of beat ourselves up trying to say, what could we have done differently? What should we have done differently? My wife is a tremendous mother. Her sister's a judge, terrific judge. Was the best big sister you could ask for. Sometimes, we don't understand the signs, the cries for help that are there. And when we do, when we find somebody resistant for a long period of time and secretive and angry when you challenge them, there's a lot of feeling that maybe you don't want to push anymore because you may alienate that child from you. She was 43 years old. When she died. I don't want to blame anybody for what happened. I just want you not to have to suffer. Through anything like this. It doesn't get better. It doesn't go away. And it is eating away at the fabric of our country. And it's costing us a fortune. And if we don't do something about this, where are we going to be as a country? Are we going to be a country of zombies? Are we going to have half the population, the young people who should be the inventors and the investors, and those people going ahead? What's going to happen to America? We shouldn't be so worried about people coming into this country. We should be worried if they don't come into this country because they may be providing us with the edge that we've always had in so many fields, so many scientific fields, because our people are less and less likely to be there if we're going to be using our resources to support drug abusers, if we're going to be using our resources to support the families of drug abusers, instead of plowing that money back into science and education and the things, our educational system. I don't have to tell you, you all know the difficult problems that we have. I sometimes think that television, with all of its promise and with all of its ability to help us in some ways, been a real disaster because it becomes the babysitter. It becomes the focal point. And kids who are not able to be disciplined on their own to do their studies and who maybe are a little rebellious about it, and they turn to the TV, and what do they see on there? Has there been any real attempt to make television something that helped engender in our people a sense of pride and a building of character? Or do we entertain to the lowest common denominator with most of what we have? Do we miss that opportunity to educate with this great weapon? You know, I don't know where we're headed, and I'm really frightened. My daughter's gone, but I have grandchildren, and I don't want them to suffer the way our beautiful Claire did. She tried, she fought hard. She got her first real experiences with drugs when she had some knee surgery. She was an athlete. She ran, and she was a gymnast. She also had TMJ. And whenever she went, these doctors would prescribe painkillers. Well, Claire's system didn't take painkillers the way maybe my system would. She developed a dependency. We did not know that, but that's the fact. You know, as I said before, our biology is all a little bit different. Our minds and our bodies are all a little bit different. And I have a food addiction. You know, I eat too much. We laugh about it, and I do. I'm not going to change, but it is the truth. My daughter Claire could eat anything in the house, eat twice as much, 3 times as much as me, and she was a skinny hook. She was just, her biology was different. Don't condemn them. Don't forget them. Be there for them. Yourself, be there for yourself. The pressures on you as a lawyer is enormous. If you do it right, you take people's responsibilities, people's fears, people's anxieties, you make them your own. That takes a toll on you. So you have to protect yourself. Don't be afraid to get assistance. And you know, I talk about drug abuse, opioids, but if it's alcohol, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, just a little slower process. You know, I gave you some of my background before. I was on the State Commission of Investigation. I was on the bench, the trial bench, and the appellate bench for years. And I'm telling you, if this could happen in my family to me, I think it could happen just about anywhere. I thought I knew how to spot things like this, and I didn't until it was too late. My wife is a brilliant lawyer. And she thought she knew how to spot these things, and she didn't. You got to look carefully. If they get a little mad at you, they get a little mad at you. You got to take the bull by the horns. But it can't be just for your children or for your own well-being. It has to be for your community and your country. You really have to feel it. I put some things in a booklet that was given to you today. I would be very disappointed if you don't take the time to read them, because they're important. Greg got some young lawyers in his office to put together some additional stuff. It's really good. It's really important. It will help your knowledge base enormously. Now, it can't stop there. You are the leaders, folks. It's you or it's nobody. Are you going to get on your goddamn legislators' asses? Are you going to get on their asses? Are you going to talk to the people who make the decisions and tell them how you feel? It really means nothing if you walk out of here and you say, it's a terrible problem. Oh, yeah, I'll join you at the game. We're going to have the Red Sox. No, they're off tonight. I hope that Dodgers come back. I hate those Red Sox.
He's a Yankee fan.
Is there anybody else? I heard some incredible things. I heard about a police chief just recently in Kenmore, New York. Heck of a cop. Heck of a cop. Taking oxy out of the boxes that were there to destroy the drugs that on the drug. Imagine. But that's what happens when this demon, when this beast gets a hold of you. I read yesterday that Jamie Lee Curtis, the actress, had a heroin addiction for 10 years. Her father, Tony Curtis, had an addiction. I knew that, pills and alcohol both. She lost a brother, 27, Nicholas, to heroin overdose. These are people who they have all the money in the world. They could take care of this kind of thing if they knew, if they knew, if they cared, if they could take care of it. The problem is some things you can't take care of. I heard that yesterday that the president was going to indicate he was going to fund more research to develop non-addictive alternatives. That's a great idea. But to say it is one thing, to do it is another thing. He said last year that we had a national crisis. I'm waiting for the response. Maybe this is finally going to be that response. I'm hoping and praying that it is. In Toronto, there's a hospital, and right up there in bold letters it says, the Hospital for the Treatment of Mental Illness and Addictions. That's the statement that the Canadians recognize it is an illness. It is a disease. It is a cancer of the worst kind. Why? We have this great medical corridor that's being built in Buffalo that will be a tremendous benefit in many ways to all of us. And I say to myself, research and beds. You know, if you go to a facility, you usually have 14 days. They expect you to be cured of drug abuse in 14 days. It's laughable. Would you throw out a person who has heart disease and say, you have to leave, your 14 days of coverage are over? And there's we're on the brink of wonderful breakthroughs in cancer research. We're doing tremendous things with research into brain aneurysms and things like that. We're making great progress. Here in the abuse of drugs, we're doing nothing. It's triage. It's wrap that initial burden. Okay, now we stop the bleeding. Yeah, but as soon as you take this Band-Aid out, it's going to bleed all over again. Yeah, well, you know, by then you may be able to do something else. We'll see you. I mean, that's what's happening. Research and beds for people, not with the limit of the number of days. Claire had been clean and sober, as I like to say, for 2 years, over 2 years. She had a gallbladder operation. It was the same group of doctors, same group, not the same doctors, but the same group of doctors that were treating her. On her charts, it said that she could not take opiates. She went into the hospital. I don't know if, I can't say, but I think it's all too common. They didn't read her charts. They didn't read that part. They're busy, and they are. They're overworked. They didn't read them carefully enough, I'll tell you that. They wind up giving her drugs during the course of operation that she had no business taking. Now, you can say, after she took it, she should tell them that she shouldn't have these drugs because she didn't know that they were Her chart said, don't give me this drug. They gave them to her. She took them. Now she's hooked again. They send her home with a lifetime supply of this crap. They send her home with enough to get her to use and trade for heroin and fentanyl. She went to a place for 28 days in Bradford, Pennsylvania. That is a pretty good place. But 28 days is not enough. I just wish that you become a part of the solution. I just wish that you write to your congressman, to your assemblyman, to your state senator, to your national senator, to your president, whether you like them or not. You write to these people and you tell them that you expect more from them in the way of leadership. This is an investment. This is an investment. Use these dollars to save us from watching our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren have a far different America than we've been able to experience with all of its problems. They're going to pale. They're going to pale compared to what we leave to our children. Come on. Don't disappoint me. This is a hard thing that I did today. I did not want to do this. Thank you.
We have an event downstairs for a meet and greet. Thank you all.
By the way, if you ever want to talk to me about this problem, if you ever want to get me to speak, if it's not cold weather and I'm not in Florida, I'll try.
Or in Italy.
Generous, passionate man. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you just